Did you know that one of the most important women in the genealogy of Jesus Christ was marked by a scandal that almost killed her? Today, we're going to find out Tamar, the woman marked by shame who gave birth to the lineage of the Messiah, a biblical story of pain, courage, and redemption that will transform your understanding of God's plan. Tamar was not a queen. She was not a prophetess. She was merely a forgotten widow, humiliated and rejected by the very family that should have protected her. But what she did in the face of injustice changed the course of sacred history forever. And the most impressive thing? Her name is written in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, alongside women like Ruth, Rahab, and Mary. How can someone marked by shame become part of God's most glorious plan? How did a woman invisible to the world become the mother of kings and an ancestor of the Messiah? This is a story of faith amidst humiliation, of divine justice that transforms scandal into eternal promise. And there's something I'll only reveal at the end of this video, a profound truth about how God uses precisely what the world rejects to fulfill his most sacred purposes. Prepare your heart, because Tamar's story will make you see redemption in a completely new way. Tamar's story begins in a world where women were invisible. In ancient Israel, a woman without a husband, without children, without male protection, was practically condemned to oblivion. Tamar knew this reality well. She experienced losses that no one should have to endure, carried a shame she did not choose, and faced an injustice that society simply accepted as normal. Imagine waking up every day knowing you're seen as a burden, that your existence bothers people, that they look away when you walk by. Tamar wasn't guilty of anything, but shame hung over her life like a heavy shadow. The patriarchal laws of the time were harsh, especially for women in the Bible who lost their husbands too young. She was trapped in a system that protected her on paper, but abandoned her in practice. And here is the question many ask when they look at stories like this. Why would God allow so much pain? Why would a faithful woman have to endure so much humiliation? Tamar had no answers at that moment. All she had was a silent faith that insisted on believing that God could still transform shame into blessing. But the path to that transformation would be more difficult than anyone could imagine. The truth is that Tamar was about to meet a man who carried a divine promise in his veins, a man named Judah, and this encounter, which seemed accidental, was part of a much larger plan, a plan that included the lineage of the Messiah. But before understanding the promise, we need to know the man who carried it, and this man was far from perfect. Are you ready to discover how God weaves his promises even through human failings? Judah was no ordinary man. He was the son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, the great-grandson of Abraham. In his veins ran a promise that God had made generations before. From his family would come a blessing for all the nations of the earth. The genealogy of Jesus began there, in that patriarchal lineage that the world did not yet fully understand. But Judah, at that moment in his life, did not understand the weight of what he carried. Imagine the scene. A man in the middle of the desert, the scorching sun burning his skin, dust clinging to his throat. Judah walks among his sheep, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. He had just lost 2 sons. The pain was real, deep, unbearable, but instead of seeking God, he blamed. Instead of trusting in the promise he carried, he shut himself off. Sadness had hardened his heart, and in that fragile emotional state, he would make decisions that would mark his life forever. Judah had responsibilities. He had a widowed daughter-in-law named Tamar waiting for him to fulfill the Levirate law, the tradition that required the closest relative to father offspring for the deceased brother. But Judah was afraid of losing another son, afraid that some curse was upon Tamar. So he did what many do when they are afraid. He delayed, procrastinated, abandoned. And it was in this abandonment that God's purpose began to unfold in an unexpected way. Because when men fail, God does not give up. When the messianic promise seemed to be at risk because of human cowardice, God was already preparing a turnaround. Tamar and Judah were about to star in one of the most controversial and at the same time most redemptive episodes in all of Scripture. But for that to happen, Tamar would need to cross a much darker valley. And that valley began with a marriage that was broken from the start. Tamar married Judah's firstborn son. It should have been a new beginning, a hope for the future. But was a wicked man in God's eyes, and the Bible doesn't hide that. Genesis 38:7 states directly, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. The death was swift, unexpected, and devastating. And Tamar, who had barely begun her new life, was already a widow, but the law had a solution for this. Onan, Judah's second son, was to marry Tamar and father a son who would be considered a descendant of This was the law of levirate marriage, a protection for widows, and a way to preserve the family lineage. Onan accepted the marriage, but refused the responsibility. He used Tamar, but deliberately prevented her from becoming pregnant. Genesis 38:9 is clear. Onan knew that the child would not be his, so he acted selfishly and cruelly, and God judged him as well. Onan died, and Tamar once again was alone. Now she was not just a widow. She was the woman who had killed 2 men from Judah's family. At least that's how many saw it. Shame and redemption were locked in an invisible battle in her life, but at that moment, only shame seemed to win. Judah had another son, Shelah, but now he was terrified. Did Tamar bring some kind of curse? Would Shelah also die? So Judah did what many weak leaders do. He hid behind a lie. He told Tamar, "Go back to your father's house and wait until Shelah grows up." But in his heart, the decision had already been made. He would never give Shelah to her. Tamar was sent back, humiliated, forgotten, branded as the cursed widow. But something inside her refused to accept that injustice, and it was this refusal that would set her on the path to divine justice. Years passed. Shelah grew up, but Judah did not keep his word. Tamar waited and waited and kept waiting. She was trapped in a social and spiritual limbo. She could not marry another man because she was still promised to Shelah, but Shelah would never come. She was condemned to a life without purpose, without descendants, without a future, and in a culture where a woman's identity was tied to motherhood. This was a living death sentence. But here is something powerful about Tamar. She didn't give up. While the world forgot her, she kept a silent faith burning. She believed that God could transform shame into blessing. She believed that there was a plan of God through pain, even when nothing around her confirmed it. That is faith in the midst of humiliation, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't show off, but simply endures. The Bible doesn't give us many details about what Tamar thought or felt during those years of waiting. But what she did afterward reveals everything. She wasn't a passive woman. She didn't accept injustice as inevitable. She decided to act. And before you judge what she's about to do, understand this. Tamar wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking justice. She wanted what was due to her by law, by right, by promise. Oh, and before we continue, if this story is touching your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories of women whom God has used in unimaginable ways. Turn on notifications because you won't want to miss this. Tamar's courage was about to be tested in a radical way. She would make a decision that would shock everyone, a decision that in human eyes seemed scandalous. But in God's eyes, it was the beginning of a spiritual restoration that would span millennia. What did she do? That changes everything. Tamar learned that Judah was going to Timnah to shear his sheep. His wife had died, and he was in a moment of emotional vulnerability. It was now or never. Tamar took off her widow's clothes, covered her face with a veil, and positioned herself at the entrance to Enaim, on the path Judah would have to pass. She knew exactly what she was doing. Judah saw her. He didn't recognize her. He thought she was a cult prostitute. He approached her and proposed a meeting. Tamar asked, "What will you give me?" Judah promised a young goat from the flock. But Tamar was more cunning. She asked for something as collateral: his seal, cord, and staff, items that identified him, items that would serve as irrefutable proof. Now let's pause here. Was what Tamar did shocking? Yes. Was it risky? Absolutely. She could have been killed for it. But here's the truth that many ignore. Tamar wasn't acting out of lust or rebellion. She was claiming what was rightfully hers. Judah had promised her his son Shelah and broken the promise. The law of levirate marriage existed precisely to protect women like Tamar. And if Judah refused to uphold the law, Tamar would find another way to secure her descendants within that lineage. She became pregnant. After that, she returned home, removed her veil, and put on her widow's clothes again. No one suspected anything. Judah tried to send the promised goat through a friend, but no one found this prostitute in Enaim. Judah was confused, but he let it go. He didn't want to expose himself too much by searching for such a woman. But the truth always comes to light. And when it did, Judah would be confronted not only with what Tamar had done, but with what he himself had become. This scandal that turned into a promise was only beginning, and the next chapter would be the most tense of all. Divine justice was about to be revealed in a way that no one expected. 3 months later, someone came to Judah with scandalous news. "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, is pregnant. She prostituted herself." Judah's reaction was immediate and violent. "Bring her out to be burned." The hypocrisy was blatant. He, who had slept with a supposed prostitute, now demanded the death penalty for Tamar without even investigating. But Tamar was prepared. As she was being led away to be executed, she sent a message to Judah: "I am pregnant by the man to whom these objects belong. See if you recognize whose seal, cord, and staff these are." Genesis 38:25. The truth was there, exposed, irrefutable. Judah held the objects. His face changed. The weight of the revelation fell upon him like a stone. And then something extraordinary happened. Judah, who could have lied, who could have destroyed the evidence, who could have continued accusing Tamar, did something rare for a man of his time. He acknowledged the truth. "She is more righteous than I, for I did not give her my son Shelah." These words changed everything. Judah publicly admitted that he had failed, that he had been unjust, that Tamar was right to seek justice. It was a moment of simultaneous shame and redemption. Judah's shame at his hypocrisy, Tamar's redemption before the entire community. She was no longer the cursed widow. She was the woman who fought for her rights and was vindicated. But more than that, she was fulfilling a role that even she herself did not fully understand at that moment. Because something much greater than a simple pregnancy was growing inside her. The continuation of the messianic lineage was growing. The power of divine forgiveness was working through a complicated, painful, yet redemptive story. And the birth that was to come would prove that God writes straight with crooked lines. The promise was about to be fulfilled, and with it, a new chapter in the history of salvation. Tamar went into labor, but it wasn't an ordinary pregnancy. She was expecting twins. During the delivery, something extraordinary happened. One of the children reached out its hand, and the midwife tied a red thread to it, saying, "This one came out first." But then the hand was withdrawn, and the other baby was born first. The midwife exclaimed, "How did you break through to come out first?" And that baby was named Perez, which means breakthrough or gap. Perez and Zerah, 2 boys, 2 names. But one of them would carry something very special. Perez would be the direct ancestor of King David, and from King David would come the lineage of the Messiah. Matthew 1:3 clearly records, "Judah begat Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar." Her name is there, immortalized in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. A rejected widow, a woman marked by shame. Now she was Tamar, mother of the royal lineage. What began as a scandal had become the seed of humanity's greatest promise. What seemed to be the end of the line was, in fact, the beginning of a story of overcoming in the Bible that would echo for millennia. God not only redeemed Tamar, he elevated her. He transformed her into an essential piece of the plan of salvation. She was not merely included in history, she became a fundamental part of it. And here's something that needs to be clear. God did not approve of sin. He did not bless wrongdoing. But he used imperfect people, complicated situations, and deep pain to fulfill his purposes. Because God's plan through pain is greater than our limited understanding of how things should turn out. Tamar's example of faith shows us that God can transform even the most desperate situations. But Tamar is not alone in this story of female redemption. She is part of a very special group of women who changed the course of sacred history. And understanding this will completely broaden your vision of how God works. Tamar was not the only unlikely woman in Jesus' lineage. Matthew, when writing the Messiah's genealogy, could have omitted all the women. After all, Jewish genealogies traditionally only mentioned men, but he made a point of including 4 women before Mary: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. And they all have something in common. Stories marked by scandal, shame, or rejection. Rahab was a prostitute in Jericho. She saved the Israelite spies and was included in God's covenant. Ruth was a Moabite, a foreigner from a people considered enemies of Israel, but her faithfulness and faith brought her into the royal lineage. Bathsheba was involved in adultery with King David, a scandal that nearly destroyed the kingdom. And yet, from her was born Solomon, who would continue the messianic lineage. Why would God choose women with such pasts? Because he wants the world to know that his grace doesn't depend on perfectionism, that his redemption reaches the most unlikely places, that the women God used weren't always the most holy in human eyes, but were those who, despite everything, trusted in him. They teach us that spiritual restoration isn't about deserving, it's about receiving. Tamar, alongside these women, represents something revolutionary. God doesn't only choose the perfect to fulfill his plans. He transforms the rejected. He redeems the forgotten. He writes his story of salvation through broken lives that surrender to his will. And that is a powerful message for anyone who has ever felt unqualified, tainted, or invisible. If God included Tamar in the lineage of the Messiah, what can he do with you? If he transformed her shame into eternal glory, how can he transform your story? This is not just an old story, it is a living invitation. And this invitation leads us to the most important point of all. When God changes history, he changes everything. Tamar is not remembered today as the woman who deceived Judah. She is not known as the cursed widow that no one wanted. She is remembered as a woman of courage, a woman of faith, a woman who did not accept injustice and trusted that God had a greater purpose for her life. When God changes history, he does not erase the past. He redeems it. He transforms it. He uses it as the foundation for something glorious. The story of Tamar teaches us that God transforms shame into blessing in ways we could never imagine. It shows that God's purpose in suffering is not to destroy us, but to prepare us for something greater. And it reveals that divine justice may be delayed, but it always arrives. Judah had to acknowledge its error. Tamar was publicly vindicated. And from a situation that seemed to be the end of everything, the continuation of humanity's most important promise was born. Think about it. If Tamar had given up, if she had accepted the injustice, if she had resigned herself to the rejection, perhaps the messianic lineage would have followed a different path. But God knew he could count on her faith, on her resilience, on her courage, and he honored her in a way that spans millennia. Every time we read Matthew 1, there is her name, Tamar. And here is the truth I promised to reveal at the beginning. God chooses people marked by pain to be bearers of eternal promises. He doesn't avoid the broken, he uses them. because when the world sees weakness, God sees potential. When the world sees shame, God sees redemption. When the world sees an end, God sees a beginning. If you are going through something that seems impossible to redeem, remember Tamar. If you carry a shame that no one knows about, look to her story. If you feel forgotten and invisible, know that God sees you exactly as He saw Tamar, and He can write your story in a way that glorifies His name forever. But there is still one more thing we need to understand. The timeless lessons that Tamar's story leaves us are too profound to be ignored. What do we learn from Tamar? First, that resilience is not just about continuing, it's about continuing with faith. Tamar could have continued living, but it was her faith that moved her to seek justice. Faith in the midst of humiliation is not passive. It acts, it waits for the right time, and she trusts that God sees what men do not see. Secondly, divine justice may be slow, but it always prevails. Judah took years to acknowledge its error. Tamar waited years to be vindicated. But when the truth came to light, it came with full force. God does not forget those who have been treated unjustly. He does not ignore the abandoned, and in His time, He corrects what is wrong. Third, God writes perfect lines even in broken stories. Tamar's story isn't pretty, it isn't simple, it isn't easy to tell children, but it's real, and it's redemptive. And it's in the Bible because God wants us to know that He can use any situation, any pain, any human failing to fulfill His eternal plans. Stories of overcoming adversity in the Bible aren't about perfect people. They're about a perfect God working through imperfect people. And finally, God's plan through suffering is always greater than what we can see at the moment. Tamar didn't know she was giving birth to the lineage of the Messiah. She only knew she needed to fight for justice. But God knew, and He was orchestrating every detail so that centuries later, Jesus Christ would be born from that same lineage. Tamar's suffering had an eternal purpose, and your suffering can too. If you've made it this far, share this video with someone who needs to know that God can transform any shame into glory. Leave a comment telling us which lesson from Tamar's story touched you the most. And subscribe to the channel because we still have many powerful stories of strong biblical characters to tell. Tamar teaches us that no matter how deep the shame, how heavy the pain, or how impossible the situation seems, when God changes the story, He transforms everything, and He can do the same for you. The story of Tamar is one of the most challenging and at the same time most inspiring in the entire Bible. It shows us that God is not afraid of complicated stories. He does not avoid the rejected. He does not ignore those marked by shame. On the contrary, He intentionally chooses them to show that His grace is greater than any human failing. Tamar, the woman marked by shame who gave birth to the lineage of the Messiah, leaves us with a clear message. You are not disqualified. Your past does not determine your future. Your pain can be transformed into purpose. And when you trust in God, even in the most impossible situations, He can write through you a story of redemption that will impact generations. So I want to ask you a question. Will you accept that your story ends in shame, or will you allow God to transform it into glory? Leave your answer in the comments, and if this message touched your heart, share it with someone who also needs this hope. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep following the stories of women and men whom God has used in extraordinary ways. Because Tamar's story reminds us that God specializes in transforming scandal into promise, shame into blessing, and pain into eternal purpose. May her story inspire you to never give up. May her faith encourage you to keep believing. And may her redemption be a constant reminder that with God, there is always hope. Until the next video. And remember, your story isn't over yet.